pleasure to be here and a part of this DASER event, and I want to thank JD for extending an invitation to me to participate. It's going to be, I think, a very interesting evening. Let's get the remote here. So one of the questions that JD asked me to address this evening was just briefly talk about the kind of work that the National Academies has been doing in and around the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm going to just highlight a few studies that sort of provide a cross-section of both the disciplines and the interests or issues in the Gulf that the Academies and specifically the National Research Council have been tackling. And so these are covers of reports that we've done. And so here are a couple discussing the excess nutrients from the Mississippi River Basin. This is generally millions and millions of pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus are basically drained from the watershed of the Mississippi River, which is about 1 million square miles, actually a little bit more than that, then feed into the river, and then as it reaches the Gulf, creates significant pollution challenges, harmful algal blooms, plankton blooms, and dead zones. I think people have heard about the notorious dead zone that forms every year in the Gulf in early summer. Well, of course, the Gulf of Mexico also is a major corridor for hurricanes and tropical storms. There's been a number of reports looking at how prepared the communities and the environment are for these storms, reducing coastal risk, looking at the hazards and disasters and the human dimensions of these storms, and then of course post-storms, how do we recover, whether it's human health issues or community resilience. One area that's the Everglades in Florida has received an enormous amount of attention. We spent a number of studies early on just trying to understand this large terrestrial aquatic ecosystem. And then over the last few years, we've actually been part of evaluating the restoration process for the Everglades. And so we have these biennial reports that are listed here where we look at different factors assessing the progress of those efforts in restoration. Well, of course, oil and oil production and spills is another area of focus. As many of you know, oil and gas production, especially offshore in the Gulf of Mexico, is extensive. 120,000 people plus are employed by this industry, generates about $15 billion in wages. And so it consequently is a major, major driver of the economies in the Gulf states. However, as we know, it's a risky industry, risky business, lots of risks, and so we've done reports on some of the available technologies for offshore operations. We've also looked at some of the tools used in post-spills, for example, oil spill dispersants, which I'm sure those of you that track the Deepwater Horizon spill recall dispersants were used in an unusual way, subsurface use. And then, of course, oil in the sea. We have a series of reports that look at just the state of what we understand about oil, how it behaves in the marine environment, and what are the consequences and fates. And then there's the spill. And frankly, I wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for the spill. Not that that's an upside by any stretch. But the fact is, as JD mentioned in his opening remarks, I was involved in a study, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But here are some of the basic facts. This was the largest offshore spill in U.S. history. It's one of the largest in the world, actually. You had a brand new, relatively new, year-old, multi-billion-dollar platform that exploded, caught fire, and sank, causing the loss of life, 11 people, and injured 17 others. But the blowout at the sea floor at the Macondo well flowed for about 87 days. And so somewhere between 175 and 200 million gallons of oil were released into the environment. And this had an obvious huge impact. More immediately, it was the economic. You had a multi-billion-dollar tourism industry along the Gulf that was impacted. Seafood, we had closures of fishing grounds extensive throughout the Gulf that caused a drop in the landings. The environmental impacts, some were immediately understood and seen through the graphic photographs we saw in the media, but the real issue is that a lot of these effects are going to last for decades. And we draw upon the experience we had with the Exxon Valdez, and we're still seeing effects from that, and this is 25 plus years later. A lot of the immediate impacts environmentally are caught up in the court case. There's this NRDA, this is a Natural Resource Damage Assessment, which is a process that the responsible parties and the federal agencies and the states work together to try and assess the impacts, and a lot of that is still tied up in court. And so we don't have that information, but hopefully when it's released, we'll have a better understanding, especially of the short-term effects. And of course, because this was such a significant spill, they actually call it, there's an acronym, SON, Spill of National Significance. It wasn't a surprise that the academies were engaged almost immediately by the government to study the spill, and we delivered a series of studies that examined the probable causes of the blowout, explosion, and spill. This was sort of looking at it from an engineering standpoint. We also had the Institute of Medicine want to look at how to monitor the population, both the workers who were involved in the cleanup, but the general population, how to monitor their health post-spill. And then the last report on the right side here was the one I was involved in, where we were looking at sort of assessing the impacts to the ecosystem. So one of the outcomes, along with all the fines and damages and the court cases, the responsible parties for this spill settled, criminal settlement, to the tune of about a little over $4 billion. And a lot of that money, about $2.5 billion, has been dedicated to restoration through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. But $500 million came to this institution, and all of the fines were really dedicated to try and enhance what we call, community benefit, try to make a difference to the communities affected by this spill. And so we've been directed to operate in 3 areas. We have this oil system safety, which is this sort of, I call it a legalese, nebulous construct. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, but essentially we're hoping to work with the oil and gas producers to strengthen the culture and their practices in the exploration and development of energy. Human health, obviously, is another area, then protecting that and environmental resources. And then we were supposed to tackle these realms by doing research and development through education and training and environmental monitoring. So I could spend a fair bit of time describing this new program and all of what we're trying to do, but I wanted to address JD's question about how interdisciplinary our work is in this regard. So both the Deepwater Horizon Study Committee that I directed and the group of advisors that participated in setting the launching our new program, which is about a year old, really bring remarkably diverse expertise to these efforts. And with our program, we had lawyers, psychologists, engineers, public health experts, educators, and many types of physical and natural or biological scientists were brought together to develop our strategic plan for this program. And the fact is, working in this realm, addressing these large-scale environmental challenges facing the Gulf, it will require both ideas and methods from all sectors and disciplines, and employing every one of the categories listed here, these strategies that we hope to employ over the next 30 years of this program, really sort of capture, hopefully we can use them to address these 3 realms in this Venn diagram here. So, for example, we were a new program. We weren't based in the Gulf. We were obviously here in Washington, D.C. There were lots of existing players. When I say players, organizations, enterprises, institutes that were already involved in various aspects of the areas that we overlap with. And so we decided to spend the first 6-8 months of our program going down to this area and listening. I mean, it was so important to get a sense of the landscape, establish relationships, understand what's being done, what's not being done, and ideally identifying niches or opportunities for our program to contribute to, like I said, restoring the environment and the communities down there. And I think one of the other things, no matter how much, we had enough, what I want to say, we had a lot of capacity, both in-house and with our advisory group. But the fact is, if we didn't have the public input, I just don't think we would have had the same strategic plan and vision for our program moving into the next 5 years. And I think that resonates now that people have seen the strategic plan. It was released in mid-September, and the stakeholders down in that community in the Gulf region, are quite receptive and quite excited about what we're going to do and what we're going to do with them. So now I'm just going to sort of zip through a series of quick slides here to capture, give you a sense of the kind of activities that this program will embark upon over the next few years. And I'll just try to highlight a couple of points with each one of these slides in these three realms. And so the first realm here is the health-related opportunities. Clearly, we're going to be focusing on looking at, the health of these communities directly, but also look at this, again, this resilience. I mean, we've got hurricanes, we have, wetland loss, we've got lots of things going on in the Gulf. And so post-disaster recovery is something that they have to do after every major hurricane. And so are there things that we can look at or study that might facilitate, strengthen communities, compare communities that are struggling versus those that seem to bounce back more readily. We're also interested in even looking at the workers who are in the offshore oil and gas industry. Just, what are they doing? Because they have, frankly, very demanding jobs that are 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. And so there's real challenges to family structure, community structure, all the typical, you make a lot of money, but you don't see your family, and you come home and you want to drink and relax, and you've got family responsibilities. A lot of tensions around mental health and community health that are tied up in this worker industry. Oil system safety, as I mentioned earlier. Here are 4 areas that in our discussions with the oil and gas industry, and again, this is a very mature industry compared to a lot of others. It's been there since the 40s in the offshore arena, $1 trillion worth of infrastructure. And so what can we do? Even with our money, we are tiny in comparison to the kind of investments that they make in the billions of dollars, whether it's in technology or what have you. So we think that as an academic-based institution, we can help with education, look at their culture of safety, in the industry, look at workforce education. These are just a couple of areas that we hope to make a difference with and collaborate and leverage our investment with industry in the process. Environmental monitoring, this is an area that I'll be taking a lead role from a staff standpoint. And one of the challenges with environmental monitoring is that there are lots of small programs and large programs as well that are at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. So there's lots of jurisdictions. There's also lots of academics that are involved in monitoring programs for research and what have you. And so you have this patchwork. And one of the things we learned from the Deepwater Horizon spill is that when it's something that large, you need a more holistic view and understanding of what's going on. And so consequently, the need for synthesis and integration of data in particular. There's a lot of data that can't necessarily be compared from site to site or from project to project. And so we want to work on some of that. The deep sea environment is another area. This is where the major oil and gas companies are moving into deeper and deeper waters, and yet, comparatively speaking, this is the least understood environment within the Gulf of Mexico. And so we really need to make some advances in understanding what's there, what's at risk, and how we might protect those resources, whether the marine mammals or deep sea corals or what have you. Clearly, building capacity, training the next generation of scientists, environmental scientists. One upside to this, a lot of money coming into the region because of the fines, because of the penalties. We have a chance to educate literally an entire generation, at least at the regional level, of environmental scientists looking at how to monitor, how to think about managing the resources of this region because of again, the funding that's coming to the universities. So I want to sort of wrap up my comments here today and talk about the challenge of communicating science. There's many challenges, and I've just highlighted a couple here that I think, at least on a personal level, resonate with me. Active scientists doing research, deal with uncertainty all the time and have a set of statistical tools that help them characterize uncertainty in their work. However, uncertainty means really different things to different people. To a child this time of year, what am I getting for Christmas? It's the uncertainty. For many of the parents in this room, when is my grown child going to finally move out of the house? Is another type of uncertainty. But scientists can rarely eliminate uncertainty from their conclusions or from their findings, and so they really don't work or communicate in sort of absolutes. I mean, you never hear never. It's one of those challenges where when you have the public coming to you wanting answers, they ask these nice broad questions, and you can't give them definitive answers, and it's frustrating, and it's a challenge for us to communicate to them about how uncertainty plays a role in understanding what we're doing as well as what we're trying to answer. Bridging the gap between the public's interests and the researcher's work. For those of you that have done research, I think it's one of the big learning experiences in grad school is that you had this giant vision of what you were going to do, and then you ended up drilling down to some minutiae detail of research that took an enormous amount of preparation and work, and then when you tried to publish, you had to characterize it relative to where it fits into this larger schematic, and you were communicating to your peers. You were, in articles or at conferences, and yet the fact is those peers understand all of the assumptions around uncertainty or the building blocks to explain what you were doing and how it all fits together. When you're dealing with the public, they want to know, well, is the seafood safe, or can I do this or do that? And it's like, the answers could be days long as far as the explanation, and yet we have to deliver succinct, clear, hopefully informative answers, and it is an enormous challenge. And then finally, managing expectations. I refer to this building as the Temple of Science because it's gorgeous, it's historic, and it acknowledges all the great scientists in a variety of displays here, and yet we're people. We have our biases, and when people ask us questions, it's like asking an engineer or something. I think some fields are fairly mature, and so when I think for biology, we spent hundreds of years just categorizing all the life that's out there. And then we spent a number of years finally with technology like microscopes to understand what's in all these organisms and in individual species. And now we're getting to the hard part, which is understanding systems, understanding how these organisms interact in the abiotic and biotic environment. And that's really hard to characterize and to admit that how much or how little we understand and know. And so I think, again, that's one of those things when we talk to the public, honesty, clarity whenever possible, but help them understand that we don't always have the answers. And I think I have one last slide. Just speaking of communication, if you want more information about the research program, please consider signing up for our e-update, and then if you have any questions, by all means, give me a call or shoot me an email. Thank you very much.